Micah Goodman, welcome back to the Tikvah Podcast.
It's great to be here, John.
Micah, I want to start this conversation as an American. And as an American, I have learned the most about my own country from the perspective of somebody outside the United States. In the 1830s, Tocqueville came to America, and he looked at the country from his own perspective, coming from France. And he saw things that Americans can't see because we're on the inside of it. And an external perspective showed something, and that taught a lot to us. So I'm coming to you as an American, and I'm looking at Israel, and I want to tell you what I see and get you to react to it.
Please.
What I see in Israeli public life right now are at least two entirely distinct, separate information environments. Two different ways of understanding the country, two different ways of understanding this moment in public affairs, two different ways of understanding the war. And the basic assumptions of both sides they're not the same. There's very little fundamental overlap. And I want to just ask you to diagnose, as you see things, the state of public affairs in Israel right now and how people are reacting to the war at this moment.
So I disagree with your assumption. Looking at Israel and seeing two different information, how do you call it? It was a great term.
Information environments.
I love that, yeah. Two different information environments and two different universes. That's looking at Israel and seeing America. In America, America is polarized. And in America, you have two different information environments. And in Israel, it's complicated. It's very complicated because if you look at the biography of the Israeli political debate, the first generation was about socialism. The leading government here, Mapai, Ben Gurion, they wanted Israel to be, socialist. And there was a Tzionim Klalim, there was Menachem Begin. They wanted more privatization, more free markets. It was a classic debate of socialism versus capitalism. That was roughly between 48 and 67. 67 changed the topic. It took a few years for it to kick in. In the 70s, we had a new conversation, a new debate. Not big government, small government, but bigger country, smaller country. The new debate was about peace and land and the whole thing. And these two debates divided Israel. But then that debate started dying also. And it wasn't replaced with any new, real, substantive debate. Israel is now enjoying or suffering from a vacuum of a massive debate. The debate in Israel today, in the past decade, has been not about ideology, but about a personality, about Bibi Netanyahu. And now suddenly Israelis are organizing, do you hate Bibi or do you admire Bibi? It's a very childish debate, by the way. And so you could say, hey, also in America we have that thing. Also we have Trump. He sucks all the oxygen out of the room. We can't think about anything besides Trump. Everything, is it good for Trump or bad for Trump? So we're the same. But that's an optical illusion. Because if you ask pro-Trump Americans that admire Trump, and you ask them what's their vision for America, they have a very specific, certain vision for America. You ask Americans that despise Trump, what's your vision for America? They have a clear vision for America, and they're very separate visions. Their visions clash. Now you go to Israelis. Ask center-left Israelis that despise Bibi, what's your vision for Israel? They'll give you a vision of Israel. You ask right-wing Israelis that love Bibi, what's your vision for Israel? They'll give you a vision. You look at it, it's kind of the same vision. So in America, the debate over Trump reflects an ideological clash. In Israel, the debate over Bibi doesn't reflect an ideological clash. It actually masks and hides the fact that we don't really have any real ideological clash between mainstream Israelis.
Okay, that may be true. We're going to probe that in a moment. But here's what I meant by the question. What I meant by the question is that I speak to and read the writing and analysis of extremely intelligent Israelis who believe that Israel is on the precipice of an authoritarian takeover, that Israel has a democracy deficit, that Israel is endangering the lives of hostages by re-engaging in this campaign. And I also read very intelligent Israelis, and I analyze their writing, and I speak with them, and they believe that Israel is finally reclaiming a democracy. It is now finally accountable to legitimate democracy, that Israel is finally doing something. The only thing that has brought hostages home is the credible threat of military pressure or the exertion of military pressure. These are two Israelis that are in fundamentally different assessments of the public square.
What we have in now Israel is another something new is happening. And that is, we've settled the argument about the Middle East. In the sense, by the way, the Israeli right is enjoying a massive victory in the battle of ideas. The first battle of ideas was capitalism for socialism. Capitalism won. The second battle of ideas about the two-state solution, right wing won. So the right defeat the left in the battle of ideas. Now there's, I think, two types of right-wingers today. Right-wingers who realize we won. And there's a word I can't say in English, being atzilut, magnanimous.
Magnanimous, yeah.
How do you say that again?
Magnanimous.
By the way, I'm Israeli. The accent is fake. I'm Israeli.
Yeah.
Magnanimous, okay. Yeah. So like, when your victory, act with
grace.
With grace.
Yeah.
And there is another part of the right that says, no, after we defeated the ideas of the left, let's defeat the tribe of the left. And that's where those two brands of right wing. Now, the brand of the right, that after we defeated the left in the battle of ideas, now we have to defeat their tribe, is using an American ideology. This is the MAGA Steve Bannon ideology. Let me try to explain this point for a minute. The Steve Bannon ideology is nationalism and patriotism is always strong when it's very easy to create a sense of us when there's a them. But almost always nationalism, the them that creates a sense of loyalty and patriotism is a different nation, right? If you're France, it might have been Germany. In the 1980s for America, it was the Soviet Union. There is a them that creates a strong sense of us. So nationalism needs someone else. That's human nature for us to define ourselves. What's happening now is that the whole MAGA movement developed a new form of nationalism. It's the following form. It has three assumptions. Assumption number one, the educated elites are not nationalistic, they're not patriotic, they don't love the country, they're not a part of the people. They're part of a universal elite, they're cosmopolitical in their ideology. That's one. Two, those elites are not national, but cosmopolitical in their ideology, which means their sense of belonging is like humanity or whatever, or to other elites in the world, but not to the people. That group controls the deep state. Assumption number three, the deep state is much stronger than the state. You put all those three assumptions together, and what comes out is that post-national, cosmopolitical people are controlling the people, are controlling the nation. And now you have a new form of nationalism, where I define my sense of belonging not as opposed to different nations, but as opposed to the elite of my nation. And since roughly 50% of the people support that elite, it creates a paradox that in the name of nationalism, you're splitting your nation. Now that is the mirror image of the paradox of the left. When the left became extreme, in the name of liberalism, it became illiberal. That's the paradox of the progressive movement. The paradox of the populist movement, that in the name of nationalism, you're splitting your nation. Now, I'm not Tocqueville, I don't want to say anything about America. These three assumptions, is the educated elite not very nationalistic? That might be true in America. It's an exaggeration. You have many great patriots that have PhDs. That's not, yeah. But in America, is like the educated elite more progressive? I think so. Does it control the deep state? I don't know. These are assumptions. These are American assumptions. Does the deep state more stronger than the state? Okay. But when you take this ideology with the three assumptions and you say, hey, Israel is the same. We have an educated elite which is progressive, which is not patriotic, which is cosmopolitical. And they control the deep state. The deep state is stronger than the state. So the second assumptions, there's truth in them. And there's a lot to be done. We need to fix things. I think we should fix things gradually with consent, like conservatives think you have to fix things, being always aware of the law of unintended consequences. But assumption number one is wrong. In Israel, the educated elite is not post-national. They just served 140 days in Khan Yunis. They lost their friends. They lost their children. They're Israeli patriots. To take the American model and to use that to understand Israel guarantees you misunderstand Israel. Just like the left always makes the mistake. Like in America, you're obsessed with race, white, black, whatever. And you look at Israel and you're saying, hey, Palestinians are darker, Israelis are lighter. Oh, that's what it is. It's rights. It's America. And when you look at Israel through an American lens, you don't see Israel. You see America. The left does that, and that's why it doesn't understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now the right is doing that. It's using an American lens to understand the Israeli conflict, and therefore it sees America, so it can't see the Israeli conflict. Because what's unique about Israel, that in Israel, the educated elite is, we have some radical progressives but they're a very small minority. The educated elite is very patriotic. And by the way, when it comes to national security issues, to policy issues, it will be very, very hard to find a real difference between our elites and our working class people. That's not. So I do think that right now we are suffering. And this move, this immigration, this aliyah of an idea makes aliyah. It's born in America, the whole MAGA thing. It might be true for America. I don't want to go into that. And it makes aliyah. And now you're looking at Israel through that lens, and you think you understand Israel. Let's destroy the deep state so we can destroy the post-Zionist elites that are controlling us. They are Zionists. Lapid voters are Zionists. Also, by the way, many of Yair Golan's voters are Zionists. And they're fighters. Some aren't. Let's not make the mistake of drawing an entire camp in the colors of the most extreme version of the camp. They do that to us. Let's not do that to other people. And therefore, Israel might suffer from the paradox, not the paradox of the left, that extreme liberalism is illiberalism, but we might suffer from the paradox of the right, where extreme nationalism splits the nation. Real nationalism, real patriotism means respecting, loving our brothers and sisters, even if they don't like Bibi.
So what is the evidence that you would bring to persuade us that despite the fact that there's protests in the streets, that it seems like there's talk of, Israel descending, even as of this morning, senior figures in Israeli public life speculate about the possibility of some civil strife. So what evidence do you bring to persuade us of the fact that division actually masks a deeper unity?
Well, when it comes to Israel is suffering from the following paradox. In America, political scientists speak about two forms of polarization: ideological polarization and emotional polarization. Ideological polarization is the right becomes more right-wing in its positions, the left becomes more left-wing in its positions, so the ideological gap grows. That's one form of polarization. Emotional polarization is whereas the right hates the left more than it did in the past, and the left hates the right more in the past. So the emotional gap grows. In America, they're growing simultaneously. What's happened in Israel is the following paradox: that while ideologically we got much closer to each other, emotionally we create a larger distance from each other. That's the paradox of Israeli polarization, where right-wingers can't stand left-wingers, left-wingers and despise them, and vice versa. And this is more than the past, while they can agree with each other much more than they ever did in the past. That's the paradox of this moment. We're trapped in brands, right-wing brand, left-wing brand. When it comes to policies, 70% of Israelis could agree not on the easy issues, on the hard issues, on the tough issues.
Such as
the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, such as religion and state, such as judicial reform. Here's a fact. In 2023, when Israel was divided into two camps, that was a myth, divided into two camps. A myth. That was the feeling. You walk down in the streets of Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, there's two camps. Pro-reform, anti-revolution. You look at social media, two camps, pro-reform, anti-revolution. They use two different terminologies. You look at the polls. The polls realize there's three camps. Not two, three. And here's how it looked like. In the far right, you had roughly 17%, if I remember the numbers right, that wanted a radical reform now. That's when the right becomes radical, not conservative. Forgets the law of unintended consequences. Forgets Edmund Burke. Forgets that, we want a radical reform now. In the far left, you had roughly 20, maybe it was 20% on the right, maybe 17%, doesn't matter. And the 17% on the left that were against any change. Another paradox. The left is conservative. You have to conserve the system. Don't touch the status quo. Okay. So the right thinks like a left. The left thinks like a right. This is the Israeli paradox. But then you had 57% of Israelis that said we need change, not like the conservatives from the left, but the kind of change we need can't be radical, immediate, and it has to be based on broad consensus. 57% of Israelis. That's the majority of Israelis. We want change. We have to do it out of negotiations and leading to the greatest achievement of democracy, compromise. Today, compromise is seen, when you compromise, it's seen like you're defeated. You're a loser. Compromise should have charisma. Compromise is a tremendous achievement. That's what 57% of Israelis wanted. So there was an optical illusion that it's pro-government, anti-revolution, while it was three camps, and the largest camp was the camp for compromise. But the paradox is that the majority of the people enjoy the minority of the passion. The centrists, the majority of the people, they don't have a large voice because they're less passionate. Our biggest challenge in Israel, how do moderate people in their views have extreme passion?
Okay, if that was the case before October 7th, then October 7th has had many effects in Israeli society. I want to ask you about them. But surely one of the effects that it's had on Israeli society is that if there was 57% agreeing on that very controversial issue, that it would have forged even greater solidarity among Israelis. Tell us what you've learned about Israel over the course of the war.
Okay, so this war, in a very bizarre way, almost mysterious way, this war follows the pattern of the Yom Kippur War. 50 years and 1 day later. The Yom Kippur War was like this. It started with a massive failure of the intelligence community. Surprise attack. Surprise attack sent a wave of chaos into the Israeli military system. The tank brigades in Sinai tried to push the Egyptians, what's called the Mitkefet Neged. How do you say Mitkefet Neged? The counterattack, to push, and it failed. Like our army, the 6-day war army failed to, not only were we surprised, we couldn't push them to the other side of the Suez Canal. Our Air Force didn't function the first 48 hours. This lack of functionality and there's all these failures led to panic. And I'm not making this up. In the third day of the war, Moshe Dayan holds his head and he says, Churban Habayit Hashlishi, which means this whole project is going down. But our army picked itself up, recovered, started fighting back, achieved tremendous achievements in the north, taking the Syrian army out of the Golan Heights, and then invading Syria and getting pretty close to Damascus. Massive victory in the north. In the south, much more ambivalent. On the one hand, Arik Sharon managed to, we couldn't push the Egyptians back to Africa, back to the other side of the canal. So Sharon figured out what's second best if we can't push them to the other side. So while they stay here, let's us go to the other side, and crosses the canal, and that's how the war ends. Who won? We always claim we won because we crossed the canal, but they say we won because we had 2 divisions in Sinai. It was a very ambivalent victory. Absolute victory in the north, very ambivalent victory in the south. 50 years, 1 day later. The failure of the intelligence community was a greater failure. The surprise was a much more massive surprise. The wave of chaos was a much larger wave of chaos. How our system didn't function in the first day or two was much, much more, it was, and then the recovery of our army.
Wait a minute, did you ever have a passing thought, Churban Bayit Shlishi?
Yes. Yeah, in the first few days or weeks, well, first of all, in October 7th, I was on my way to Shul, and I heard there were sirens, and there were rumors about the hostages, and I thought that Hezbollah is going to join any minute. I didn't go to Shul. I ran home to watch TV, because I was sure if Hezbollah would have joined in October 7th, the chances are we would have survived, but the risk would have been real. For our very existence would have been real. We might have had to do very radical things to save ourselves. Thank God Hezbollah, just like we didn't understand exactly the situation, they didn't understand their opportunity. They missed a tremendous opportunity. the axis of resistance on October 7th. So anyway, so it seems like we were like, the whole pattern of the Yom Kippur War, we relived it just with one difference. It's on steroids.
But yeah, because just to continue, similarly, ambivalence in the South.
Yeah.
Amazing victory in the North.
And it's much more, the victory in the South is much more ambivalent. It's not really a victory. And the absolute victory in the North is even more impressive than the victory. So everything we saw in the Yom Kippur War, about it is not metaphysical. I don't think this is like I think it's a coincidence, but it's a hell of a coincidence that we repeated this whole thing. Now, the Yom Kippur War was a war that changed Israel. You know how in France, the French have this thing that every time France changes enough, they say, okay, now we're a different France. We're not the Fourth Republic, we're the Fifth Republic.
New Republic.
Yeah, it's interesting that they do that. Now, borrowing that French model, I would say Israel had till today two republics. The first Israeli Republic. The analogy is not perfect because in France it also has to have a constitutional element, but it's good enough. The first Israeli Republic was between 48 and 77. Socialism, secularism, nationalism, Ben Gurion. It was a very European Ashkenazi. That was the first Israeli Republic. And then there was a second Israeli Republic. Not secular, more traditional. Not Ashkenazi, more heterogeneous, also Mizrahi. Not socialist, more capitalist. Like Israel changed its character when we entered the second Israeli Republic. But what moved us from the first Israeli Republic to the second Israeli Republic was the Yom Kippur War. That was the moment where Israel says, okay, what we did till now, okay, it was good for the beginning. It stopped working. We have to shift modes. And the second Israeli Republic, the Begin, the Likud, that was the second Israeli Republic.
Micah's pointing because we're speaking this morning at the Begin Center in Jerusalem, and
that's right.
So
I forget this is not the crowd.
Yeah. But your point is that the war itself actually authorized a new regime.
It meant the end of the first Israeli Republic and the birth within a few years of the second Israeli Republic. Now, since we're repeating the Yom Kippur War, this is a much bigger moment than the Yom Kippur War. Are we going to repeat not only the patterns of the war, but the renewal that happened after the war? That's the biggest question at this moment in Israeli history. Now, if the third Israeli Republic will be born out of this horrible moment in our history, what will the third Israeli Republic look like? I don't know. I just know, but to answer your question, maybe this war is a guide. Because this war, in its very, very low points, October 7th, and its very high points, beepers, you guys don't say beepers, you say...
beepers is good, pagers.
Pagers, walkie-talkie, the whole north. Yeah. And the destruction of what they call the axis of resistance that tried to destroy Israel and in the process destroyed itself. So we ask, okay, what led us to the lowest points? And what led us to the highest points? And we have to ask both questions. Now, what led us to the lowest points? There's the technical question, like how did A200 not listen to the right? Okay, there's technical questions, which need to be investigated in a non-political committee that tries to figure out what happened here so we have the knowledge. But there's also a deeper question. The failure of October 7th, what did that say about our collective personality? Let me put it more bluntly. What's screwed up in our collective personality that led to October 7th? We have to have the same questions about the destruction of the axis of resistance.
But why do you operate with the assumption that Israel is somehow responsible, that Israel did something, that something in Israel's personality allowed for October 7th to happen?
Because I personally think that Jews have a problem. In during the Bible, our nation split into two different nations, Israel and Yehuda, and they had at least 4 civil wars between them. And then in Beit Sheni, in the Second Commonwealth, So when the Romans were attacking us, on the top of the agenda of the different tribes of Jerusalem, of Yochanan Migush Chalav and Shimon Bar Giora, wasn't to unite to protect ourselves from the Romans, but to attack each other while the Romans were getting closer. Our cultural genes are tribal and divisive. And Muhammad in the Quran, in Surah 59, chapter 59 of the Quran, he tells Muhammad part of what he had to do, he had to encourage his soldiers before they go to war, and they had a war with Jews. There was 3 Jewish tribes in Al-Madinah. He tells them, don't be afraid of the Jews. This is in the Quran. Don't be afraid of the Jews. They seem united. In their hearts, they hate each other. They're split. How does he motivate his soldiers? By telling them that Jews don't know how to unite. He understood something about something distorted in the historic psyche of Jews. By the way, when Yahya Sinwar saw us fighting in 2023, those verses from the Quran came back to life. Yahya Sinwar, by the way, when he saw us fighting in 2023, he didn't see that fight as an opportunity to attack us. He saw it as a divine commandment to attack us. And that I know from the Israeli intelligence. So yes, we do have a lot of our collective weaknesses brought us to October 7th. But let's ask the second question. The success that we enjoyed in this war, the massive success, the destruction of what we did to Hezbollah, that transformed Lebanon, that transformed Syria, what we did to Iran, where does that come from? And not only technically, which is important to create the knowledge that led to success so we could repeat it, but what in our collective personality was exposed. Because we need to learn both what's screwed up about our collective personality and what's really great about our collective personality. Because you have to know yourself, and war is a great lesson about who you are in order to reinvent ourselves and reinvent the Third Israeli Republic. So when I think about, let's just think about what happened to Iran and what happened to Hezbollah. In Binjbil, which is a town in the south of Lebanon, in May 2000, Hassan Nasrallah, how do I say the opposite of Zichrono Livracha? So in May, he gave, after Israel left Lebanon, so he gives a speech where he says, Israel has the best air force in the Middle East and has nuclear capabilities, but it's weaker than cobwebs. And he's referring to a verse in the Quran where he says that people that don't rely on God are like the weak, as like the beta, like the they're as weak as cobwebs. It's not exactly that, but that was the reference.
Spider.
What? Spider. Yeah, it's translated to Hebrew beta akavish, like the house of the spider, which is the web. Akavut, bדיוק, כמו שניסיתי להגיד. So, what was his assumption? His assumption is that Israel has the best technology, very high capabilities. But the strength of a society is measured not only by the strength of its capabilities, but the strength of its will. And he thought that Israel suffers from the asymmetry, high capabilities, very low will. While the resistance, Hezbollah, has low capabilities, but very strong will. And in Islam, they believe that the basic law of history is that will defeats capability. By the way, Muslim history proves that Arab tribes from the Arabian desert defeated 2 empires, the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, simultaneously. The Persians and the Byzantines had high capability. The Arabs from the desert that just became Muslim had all the what in Arabic is called asabiyeh, unity, solidarity, determination, motivation, will. The myth of Islam is that the victories of Muhammad was the victory of will over capability. Now think about it. Our enemies always love the precedent of France and Algeria. The French, I think, killed over 1 million Algerians, and the Algerians didn't surrender. The Algerians killed maybe 20,000 French, and the French just left Algeria, which means will defeats capability. Okay, so the lens that Khamenei and Nasrallah were looking at us oh, Israel's weak. It's strong in its capability, it's weak in its will. And they thought that because that's true about probably every Western society. And there is a paradox within Western society. Abundance creates capability. When you're a wealthy society, you can have the best high-tech, the best technology, the best weapons, the best army. But the abundance that creates high capability almost always creates low will. By the way, this has to do with the paradox of individualism. It's individualism that creates innovation, creativity, ambition, taxes, money. Innovation and money creates the best army, high capabilities. That's the fruit of individualism. But it's that very individualism that dilutes your will to fight. We're all on our own, right? Collectivism creates less ambition, less capabilities, less innovation, but a lot of motivation, a lot of will to fight. So it seems like there is a historic law. There's a zero-sum game between will and capability. What did Israel do in this war? What we saw in this war in Israel, we saw two different performances. One, when we saw pagers, walkie-talkies, the attack on Iran, we saw high-tech, the best intelligence, the best of mind-blowing capabilities. But we also saw something else, John. Every Israeli soldier which was wounded that, read a book of, wanted me to come, that reached out. So I left everything I did and I came to visit this wounded soldier. Probably not because I'm so unique. That's what every Israeli would have done. That's what all Israelis did. And every wounded soldier I visited, I think it was every one of them. Some of them looked very bad. Some of them aren't with us now. Every one of them had one wish: to go back to fight. To go back to their pluga, to their soldiers, to go back to fight. Now, that wasn't surprising because we saw something, because it just echoed a collective spirit. Tomer Greenberg, Magad 13, he's the commander of Gdud 13 in Golani. He lost 45 soldiers in October 7th alone. And he gave a speech to the soldiers. We have 45. He said, we can't now just suffer, and we don't have time for that. We have to go into Gaza now. We have 45 angels watching over us, and they went into Gaza from the north all the way to the city of Gaza, all the way to Saja'ir, and then he heard a soldier going into a building fighting terrorists, and the radio was cut off. He couldn't hear him. In an army, when the radio is cut off and you can't hear, there's chashash khatifa. That means that it's possible that he's kidnapped. So the commander did the only thing he knew what to do. He himself ran into that building, taking a soldier out and getting hit. So Tomer Greenberg, someone who I love, he is just what I'm trying to say is that the heroism of this war on all levels, shocked us and are inspiring us. By the way, it's at all levels. It's also the level of Elisha Rabbi, our brother that came back from Gehenna, which our audience knows who Elisha Rabbi is. Yeah. Also, our audience at home.
Elisha Rabbi is one of the hostages that's just returned. He just spoke at the United Nations. Please.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't see it. Yeah. So in an interview in Israeli TV to Ilana Dayan, he describes how one night one of the Hamas terrorists came into his cell and for no real reason just broke his bones, just beat him up. And he was so bruised, they had to give him an aspirin so he could get through the night. The next night, he asked for another aspirin. They said, you're on your own now. He was in a cell with Alon Ohel, our brother, which is still there under the ground. Alon Ohel somehow smuggled an aspirin. He gave him his aspirin. So he asked, what is this? That is as heroic as Tomer Greenberg, Gdud 13. We have heroism in so many brands and shapes and forms. Agam Berger saying, I'm keeping Pesach in Gehenom. Emily Damari saying, I want to stay behind with Keith. So we've discovered two things about us in this war. What's more interesting, walkie-talkie, pagers, or Alon Ohel giving him his aspirin? Or Tomer Greenberg going all the way to Saja'ir? or every wounded soldier. I think the number is 1,500 wounded soldiers been back to the battlefields. I love America, but I know that in the war in Vietnam, every time a soldier got a small cut in his hand, they saw it as a ticket out. In Israel, so what we've discovered is that Israel, we always thought that there is a zero-sum game between capability and will. Israel broke that zero-sum game in this war. It performed the capability of a Western society, but the will of a Middle Eastern tribe. Which means the superpower of Israel, that we're Western and not that we're Middle Eastern, our superpower is that we're hybrid. And I said before that the paradox of individualism, it creates high capabilities, but it weakens will. Israel is not an individualistic society. It's not a collectivist society. It's a hybrid society. We are individualist collectivists. Israelis are hyper-individualists. We know that. Try to tell an Israeli what to do. And good luck with that. Ben Gurion said once that the worst job in the world is to be a prime minister of Israelis. Because you're prime minister of 1 million prime ministers. Jonathan Zaks, alav shalom, said about the Jewish people, we're ungovernable people. Ask Moshe Rabbeinu. Hyper-individualism. And individualism means that, you appreciate human rights and human autonomy and leave me alone, government. And like Frank Sinatra saying, I'll do it my way. And I build a startup. And I'm filled with individualistic ambition in Tel Aviv, whatever. And I'm in the free market competing with another ambitious individualist Israeli. And then October 7th happens. And I'm 140 days in Khan Yunis. And moving from individualism mode to collectivism mode. Now, individualism mode and collectivism mode are two different emotional systems. Individualism is the energy that comes from self-fulfillment. I have a dream. I'll do it my way. That whole individualist American energy, we have that. Self-actualization, self-fulfillment. Collectivism is about self-sacrifice. Israelis managed to put those two things together. To move from self-fulfillment to self-sacrifice, backwards and forwards. And by the way, not all Israelis. This is mainstream Israelis. They don't even know they're doing this. It's so natural to them to have two different emotional systems. So yeah, I think that's what we learned from the war. We learned that we have a tendency, we have those poisonous genes that divide us. We also learned that we're hybrid. We're individualists and collectivists. And when we think about the Third Israeli Republic, this is how it needs to look like. It has to be a national liberal society, a collectivist individualist society. The right wing in Israel say we're the national camp, like they have a monopoly over nationalism. The left say we're the liberal camp, like they have a monopoly, and if you're not with us, you're not liberal and you're not enlightened. Most Israelis are not national and not liberal. They're national liberal. By the way, that was the idea of Menachem Begin and Zev Jabotinsky. That liberalism and nationalism complete each other, complement each other. What I'm saying is this is where we learned that Israelis internalize this emotionally, where we're collectivist and individualist. So you ask, yes, this is what we've learned about our collective personality, about our worst and about our best. We have to continue learning this. That's what I'm trying. Because this is the knowledge that could guide us when we try to create the Third Israeli Republic out of this dark moment.
This conversation was recorded on March 21st in Jerusalem. Micah Goodman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.